As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
He said on Thursday again that Ukraine's counteroffensive will be long and, quote, very violent. Isn't that nice? Very violent. Let's support it. Let's support it. Let's be very violent. The U.S. has already announced a new weapons package to replace the Bradley and Stryker armored vehicles that Ukraine has lost. And Ukraine's asking for more tanks. Isn't that great? So now there's a ramping up of talk about a nuclear exchange. We've been warning about this since the war broke out. You cover your Trends Journal. 2 days before the war happened, on February 22nd, 2022. From COVID war to Ukraine war to World War, with that nuclear explosion behind it. So President Dmitry Medvedev of Russia, former president, threatened, quote, a preemptive nuclear strike against Europe. If a nuclear bomb is dropped on your city, here's what you should and shouldn't do to increase your chances of staying alive. How about that for real stupidity and ignorance? Staying alive after a nuclear blast. As John F. Kennedy said in his speech to the graduating students at American University in June of 1963, when it was all about peace, he said, if the United States goes to war, nuclear war against the Soviet Union, 1963, 2000, and here we are, in 23. All those years later, he said the world will be destroyed in 24 hours. But they're giving you, here's what to do if a nuclear bomb goes off. Like when I was a little kid, they had us hiding under a desk. Like that was going to make a difference. Idiocy of the highest degree. Drop to the ground with your face down and your hands tucked under your body. Why don't you put your hands out? Oh, your hands are good. You put it about the back of my body. No, just do what we tell you to do. Stand 6 feet apart. Maybe that's what they should be telling everybody. If there's a nuclear explosion, stand 6 feet apart. So there you have it. It's going down in front of our eyes. We are on the cusp of a nuclear annihilation. World War III has already begun. You saw what happened the other day. It came out earlier this week. U.S. government agencies hit by global cyber attack. Oh, who did it? Oh, the Russians. Just like that Russiagate never happened, where they said that Russia was the one that made Trump win the election. And people believed it. And now they're talking about a cyber attack by Russia. You see what they're doing? They're setting the groundwork for this. It's going to be a false flag or a nuclear exchange that's going to make it official. Now, what happens if there's a cyber attack in a bank? Sorry, folks, you lost all your money. And the global economy is failing in front of our eyes. Europe is in a recession. Oh, New Zealand just announced they're in a recession too. One country after another going down. One war after another. And now we're in the war to end all life if we don't end it. I read you what they are saying. I'm not making this up. The words are coming from them. This guy, Karaganov, claimed that Western countries have lost, quote, the fear of hell or Armageddon, which could result in a full-scale nuclear war. So there you have it. What are you going to do about it? What am I going to do? Which, according to Brown University's study that came out 3 weeks ago, since 9/11, the United States spent over $8 trillion. And they're not sure. They killed either between 4.3 3 or 4.5 million people. We have demonic, evil people in charge. They're murderers. They're murderers. You don't ask the Bloods or the Crips why they murder and steal. It's who they are. And you don't ask these politicians why they murder and steal. That's who they are. Most of them, not all of them, the vast majority of them, evil, demonic people that support war after war after war.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network. There are moments sometimes where in between all of the bullshit, someone either gets caught off guard or they're just a little too naive. Usually it comes from the younger people, like the younger senators or a newer reporter who just says the thing out loud that you're not supposed to say. Just says that they're like, oh, I didn't realize that was, we weren't supposed to say that part. And it reminds me of, Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy. He was, on C-SPAN, once a few years ago. And he was one of the guys who was real instrumental in the Maidan Revolution, the coup there in Ukraine in 2014. But he was like the young guy there. It was like McCain and Lindsey Graham and, Victoria Nuland, like the old school war hawks. And then him. This junior senator was kind of along there too. And he was on C-SPAN and he just blurted out at one point. He goes, I mean, it was our policies that overthrew the Yanukovych government. I mean, it's like weird. Like, if it wasn't for us, he never would have been overthrown. And then you can just tell it's this moment where you're like, oh, no one told you, dude. You're not supposed to say that. But it's refreshing because it's like, oh, okay, we got a little truth there. All right, fine.
But what he was supposed to say was the will of the people who preferred freedom to the old guard.
Yeah, something like that. And it's funny, like, even years later when people will be arguing with me, that was not a U.S.-backed coup. It's like, well, the senator involved certainly seems to think his policies are the ones that got Yanukovych overthrown. Anyway, what was unique about this one was that this wasn't one of the young guys. This wasn't one of the new kids on the block, so to speak. This was the most powerful senator in the United States of America. And he was on Rachel Maddow's show. You're going to have to take yourself back to January of 2017. Donald Trump has been elected, but he has not yet been sworn in. He is the president-elect. And Chuck Schumer's on Rachel Maddow's show, and he's just saying his usual nonsense, canned responses, blah, 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 all the stuff that they say. And then Rachel Maddow goes off script. She brings something up to him right away, right off the top. And you can tell as you watch this that this part wasn't scripted because he's presented with something on the spot. Let's go back to January 2017 and play this clip.
Opportunity. So I was distraught right after the election, but I'm now actually invigorated by the challenge and our ability to succeed in this challenge.
Let me ask you, I don't know if you have seen this. I don't want to blindside you with this. This is the latest statement, latest tweet, as you were just saying, President-elect's latest unsolicited pronouncement on the intelligence community. This was his tweet just a little while ago tonight. You see the scare quotes there. The intelligence briefing on so-called Russian hacking was delayed until Friday. Perhaps more time needed to build a case. Very strange. We're actually told, intelligence sources tell NBC News since this tweet has been posted, that actually this intelligence briefing for the president-elect was always planned for Friday. It hasn't been delayed. But he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
What do you think the intelligence community would do if they were motivated?
I don't know, but from what I am told, they are very upset with how he has treated them and talked about them. And we need the intelligence community. We don't know what's going on. Look at the Russian hacking. Without the intelligence community, we wouldn't have discovered it.
Do you think he has an agenda to try to dismantle parts of the intelligence community? I mean, this form of taunting hostility.
Whether you're a super liberal Democrat or a very conservative Republican, you should be against dismantling the intelligence community.
Senator Charles.
All right, man. I mean, doesn't that just say it all? What a fascinating thing to just broadcast on air. There's like, well, I mean, the president can't be critical of the intelligence agencies. You can't criticize these guys. They'll totally screw you. They have 6 ways to Sunday to screw you. And the funny thing about it is that he was right. Chuck Schumer was telling the truth.
I just did an episode of Run Your Mouth with Gary Richide, who's a historian, said that goes back like 100 years, and literally it seems to me like any government action would be in violation of that technical law. That seems to almost be the fail-safe law in the books, that if you wanted to prosecute someone for being against the deep state, that's your fail-safe. Because any conversation you have with a foreign power about anything that you're doing in office would seemingly be in violation of that law. So literally every action that a president ever does, or anyone seemingly when talking to another country, would be in violation of the technical way of that law. And so the fact that you haven't seen a lot more people being prosecuted by it, it seems like that is the law, the fail-safe on the books, that if you want to find someone guilty of something, oh, well then we got this treason law.
This is the way government works in general, and the way out of control governments work. There was a book about this. I can't remember. I read this. It was like 15 years ago or something like that. There was a book about I think it concluded that the average American commits, I can't remember, it was like 4 or 6 felonies a day. Like if you actually look at all the laws on the book, we're like always all committed. You can't exist and operate in this world without breaking some type of laws. So this is kind of the way this works. You have laws on top of laws on top of laws, regulations on top of regulations on top of regulations. And then for the most part, they're not enforced because none of us could literally move from point A to point B if they were. But anytime they decide they feel like enforcing one of them, they can. And this is where you get kind of this anarcho-tyranny.
For these guys to be dressing up like they're at war when they're in Austin, Texas, or in Santa Monica, California, you got to be kidding me, dude. Who do you think that you're fighting? What do you need all this body armor for? And then it took me a while, I guess, my point, to get it that they don't get the joke. They don't think it's funny at all. And attitude follows behavior. Dress a cop up like a soldier, and he's going to convince himself that, of course, it's necessary, or else why would he be doing it? Yep. And that's what he's up against is terrible David Koresh's everywhere. Mm-hmm. That's how he has to frame it. Right?
Well, you remember how SWAT came into our vernacular and our culture? Was I think Chief Gates at LAPD was the first one to really do it. They were complaining about we can't barge into crack houses because the doors are reinforced, and he got a couple armored vehicles, and of course it escalated. At the same time, and this is very important too, there was a TV show called SWAT. Remember, starring Steve Forrest, and every night he'd put on his battle gear and they'd go out and do battle with heavily armed criminals. And so the legitimacy of it, and that's where an awful lot of the stuff that we have in society comes from, is in Hollywood, from these depictions. But where you wind up is one of the most chilling testimonies I heard during the Waco hearings was a detective, and he was being asked, well, why didn't you just go up and serve the warrant at the door? And he was angry. He says, the day of a couple of detectives going up to serve a warrant is over. We're going to crush him. And I forget the name of the guy, but damn.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the House Government Reform Committee found, quote, the subcommittees concluded that Operation Alliance personnel knew or should have known that ATF did not have sufficient drug nexus to warrant the military support provided to it on a non-reimbursable basis. So I love that. Isn't it just like Brazil or THX 1138, where the reason that any of these agencies care is the dollars and cents. So you have the Government Accountability Office that used to be called the General Accounting Office, right? And so they're saying this agency owes this other agency money, and then we get to find out because they spent it on this lie-based activity, and that's how we end up finding out the details. There's Rick Ross is the guy, not the CIA back crack dealer of LA in the 1980s, and not the rapper, but Rick Ross, an entirely different Rick Ross, the anti-cult deprogrammer guy that goes around, as Tabor called him, have gun will travel, and goes around making a living doing this. It's really important, those guys' roles, both of them, in setting the narrative and really demonizing, again, Koresh, not just him, but Koresh in place of all those other people who were with him in that place, which is so important. That whatever sticks to him sticks to everybody else 100% for some reason, but that was the way that they would portray it. So we covered how the warrant is essentially a mess. It's just conspiracy theory stuff. There is no probable cause in it. It's essentially, a pile of claims that any one of which falls short, and then all of them together also fall short. Just like a lot of these, just like Russiagate, or just like the case of Saddam Hussein, it's 10 times 0, still equals 0. But it added up to the search warrant in this case.
With regard to Robert Rodriguez, it's really obvious that they knew he was undercover because after the first raid, Koresh has been shot and wounded. He's talking to 9/11, and he says something about, our firearms were always open to inspection. That's what I told Robert. And the 911 guy has no idea what he's talking about, just says yes. And then Koresh says, the guy you sent out here. So, I mean, this is in the immediate aftermath of the gunfight. Koresh always knew this guy was undercover.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, as I understand, David told me they were trying to convert him to
David Thibodeau,
to see Jesus or
yeah,
religion or whatever, save souls.
And I think they were doing the same during the siege with the negotiators.
Yeah.
Right. So, and in fact, they were teasing Rodriguez and the ATF agents. And they were saying, because he was reporting to them that these Davidians are not so bad. I mean, they're just studying the Bible all the time. And they were going, you got the Stockholm Syndrome, or, you're falling for it and you're joining their cult. Yep. And that he jokingly replied, well, maybe. And then there was another quote where he had done an interview with a newspaper where he said in a non-sarcastic way that he was getting close to being convinced. He really was learning a lot, and he was really taking what they were saying very seriously, which is interesting because, with a name like Rodriguez, you'd think that he was raised Catholic and that this is pretty far apart from his upbringing, but he was like, man, you sure know the Seven Seal stuff pretty well. And which is right. Not to say that he was hypnotized. None of them were hypnotized. The guy had a compelling thing if you're interested in that kind of subject, evidently, right? So, and that even had worked on Rodriguez. And then, so as we know, and as you mentioned, the ATF took Koresh shooting, or asked him to take them shooting. And
I'm not sure if you guys can clarify this. I believe my understanding is that the Davidians had no guns. When they went, the cops brought
Yes.
all the guns.
Yes.
And they were just shooting
These,
there.
these were the guys in the undercover house, and they were instructed to find out how well armed the Davidians were. So they took their own AR-15s. These are ATF agents, and went over and asked, "Can we go shooting on your land?" And David Koresh himself came down and said, "Sure, and I've got some ammunition for those guns." So Koresh is carrying the ammunition. The agents have all the guns. And this was, if I remember correctly, 9 days before the raid and the shootout. They had him with them. They had all the guns. And if that wouldn't have worked, you could just invite him out to go shooting again, and this time set everything up.
Yep. And amazing. They're handing him, and I'm sorry because I don't have this clip, but Paul Fata told me that Koresh had told him that when the cop had handed him the AR-15, that it had whatever markings on it, identified it as U.S. government property.
Okay.
I'm like, all right, guys. Like, hey, what did you guys do today? Well, we were out shooting with the cops,
Yeah.
right? Like, there was no secret about it. They might as well have been wearing badges around their necks.
I rest my case.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And Koresh did eventually get armed when one of the agents loaned him his .38 Super. And Koresh shot it and said, "It's a nice gun. I got to get one of these someday." So, I mean, yeah, he's unarmed until you loan him the gun, because it's just not decent to shoot off his ammunition and not let him shoot.
You know, I mean, this is the thing. As long as we're taking our time here, guys, we're like, forget every other thing that you know about this story. And we're just think about that itself. This one thing, this one story, it could be about any group of people in any state in this union. That, what they did was they went shooting with the guy. And then 9 days later, they led a 60-man paramilitary assault on his church on a Sunday morning.
And they had to do that because they couldn't arrest him peacefully. The guy they just went shooting with.
Yeah. Now, here's David Koresh himself on that question.
You could have arrested me any day as I jogged up and down this road. You could have arrested me going to town or going to Walmart. All this stuff you guys may want to avoid and deny. And I do not appreciate it, and never will I ever appreciate somebody coming here and pushing people around with guns. Hey, I'll meet you at the doorstep any day. And somebody will get hurt. If you want to keep playing that game, I'm talking to you. Somebody's going to get hurt. Because this ain't America anymore when the ATF has that kind of power to come into anybody's home and kick doors down and things like that.
And, I guess I'm pretty happy to say, guys, that I think if anybody ever says Waco, that one of the first kind of general knee-jerk response sort of answers from John Q. Public is they could have arrested that guy while he was out jogging. They could have arrested him when he went to Walmart.
Well,
People know that. That's a real,
know that.
widespread, widely accepted truth that this didn't have to happen at all. And wait, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, I'm not sure it's as widely known as you're indicating. And I've also noticed that when I'm writing articles on this 30th anniversary of things, I was having people ask it, the newspapers are not publishing them. They're publishing the stuff, the other stuff that tells the other story.
Yeah, well, and that's why we're doing this, because it is, definitely they're having their chance. And we're not going to play the whole thing, but I have the whole thing here, but we'll just play the first little bit of it. But this is, again, the second black man to graduate from Harvard Law School. He's highly respected, who we played the clip earlier of Alan Stone saying this man was not a weirdo, etc. So here's his reaction to the ATF raid.
911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency?
There are men, 75 men around our building.
Okay, just a moment.
This Link. Hello? Hello?
75 men.
Hello? 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 Yeah, this is Lieutenant Lynch. May I help you? Yeah, there are 75 men around our building and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel? Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off. All right, hello? I hear gunfire. Oh, shit. Hello? Who is this? Hello? Call it off. Who is this? Hello? Hello? Oh, my. Hello?
He said there was 75 men.
Fucking newspaper. Hello? Hello? Wayne? You might page the water and tell him I've got an open line into the compound, it sounds like. Just tell him again to call you and then tell him I'm down here and that I've got an open line into the compound, I believe. Well, I'll tell you what. Get on our primary channel and call Radio Van, see if they'll respond. That's going to be ATF. Just say Radio Van, Waco Dispatch.
All right, so David Hardy, let's talk about what we just learned from that 911 call. And then, of course, you can add to what you learned when you synced it up with all the other audio there. But just your first takeaway from hearing Wayne Martin call 911, sir.
It was obvious that Wayne Martin was terrified and that his reaction was to call the police. As far as, they're tempted to depict the Davidians as criminals. Criminals do not call 911.